Right. Hey there, welcome to Midiboom, a brand new channel by myself and Stefan. So he's Stefan,
And here's Richard.
and we're composers.
We are. And we've created this channel to get a bit more in depth with some video game music that we love. So we'll be doing a few different types of videos. We'll be doing some longer style podcast discussions where we talk about various topics of video game music and go into a bit of detail and analyze things, talk about what we like, what our thoughts and things are. We'll also be doing some let's plays of some games. We'll kind of play through a game and look at the music and sound within that and go a bit more in depth into the wonderful world of video game music.
Yeah. And as a reward for tolerating us when we do really badly at those games, at the end of each major playthrough, we're going to be doing, or releasing, I should say, two pieces. One of them will be an original piece in the style of the soundtrack of said game. And the second one will be a remix of a popular tune within the soundtrack, remixed in a completely odd way of doing it, effectively. So, yeah, look forward to them.
Yeah, we'll also on the side, we obviously being composers write music ourselves, so we'll include some links in the videos to some stuff that we're doing in our little business Syntone. We have an album that we'll be releasing concurrently with these first few videos as well, so make sure you check that out. And also make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to keep following along with our stuff, and leave us some comments, feedback, and keep the discussion going, because we'd love to hear what you have to say and kind of keep the talk going a bit more.
We also have Twitters and emails, so feel free to contact us that way, and we hope you enjoy our very first episode. So, see ya.
See you later.
Way!
Wow!
Okay, good. That's a good start.
Yeah.
Hey, hello. Welcome to Midiboom Discuss. I'm Richard.
And I'm Stefan. Welcome.
Hey, and what we're going to be talking about today is Zelda music. I should have mentioned what Midiboom Discuss is. I'll do that now. Midiboom Discuss is basically where we're going to talk about a certain subject in video game music. And this one is about, as I mentioned, Zelda music.
Yeah, so basically, like, we are big fans of video game music. Aside from being big fans of music in general as composers, it's a big part of what we like and what we do. So we thought we'd have these podcasts to kind of talk about that in more detail. And the obvious first topic for us was Zelda games, because we frequently talk about this for it seems like days on end.
Yeah, definitely. When we're trying to do business stuff, when we're doing business stuff for Syntone and such, we tend to end up spending about maybe 3 hours, and 45 minutes of that is actually business. The rest of that will be talking about Zelda. Like, we'll go like, hey, have you got to this bit in this game? You're like, oh yeah, and then we're lost. No more business.
And then we're like, well, with productivity gone.
Yeah, completely, utterly destroyed. Same with many other things as well. I remember when we talked forever when the new Mario Kart DLC came out. Like,
very true. Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, this is about Zelda. Although Link is in Mario Kart, so technically we're on topic.
We haven't gone off topic yet. Only like 2 minutes in.
Yeah.
So basically we thought we'd go through and we're going to just kind of give an overall look at Zelda game music. So we may end up zooming into specific games, but we just want to kind of go through the whole thing, look at Zelda games across the ages, and see how it's kind of come and gone and appeared in different forms with different consoles and games.
And if you've never heard Zelda music before, which I'm highly doubt, but if you haven't, I'll probably just stick some of the music which we're talking about in the background as we're talking in this. So, then you'll hear exactly what we're talking about. Hopefully, if I'm clever enough to actually remember to put that in.
We will see.
We'll find out. But anyway, we figured we'd start talking about the very first Zelda games we ever played, which we both found out was actually Ocarina of Time on the N64.
Go figure.
Yeah, well, it's actually a first for a lot of people.
Oh, I think so. And that's probably why it's worth talking about, because, I think with the series like that, it's so you always kind of remember the first one that you play, and that Ocarina of Time in particular being so different in the not only in the Zelda series but kind of at that time in gaming in general.
For sure,
very interesting one to jump in.
It's a very iconic game. I mean, when you look at it now, it's a little dated. I mean, I'm playing it through with Darren, one of our friends, because he's never played it before, and the 20 frames per second thing's a bit like
janky,
a bit janky. Like he complains about the controls regularly, but you know, back in the day, that was the bee's knees. The whole one weird ass multiple thumb controller that was the N64 controller. So but back when we were kids, it was an amazing game.
I love that game. I've played through it so many times, but yeah, the music has always stuck with me.
Yeah, Karen, sorry, I was about to say something.
No, I think there's just you still have so many of those classic themes that have come through all of the games, and we were probably fortunate to come into it at a time where the orchestrations and the sound were much more lush than they'd ever been with the introduction of it on N64.
Yeah, sure. I mean, like, the music is iconic for Ocarina of Time. Everyone knows practically every piece from that game. And as composers, obviously, we write our own music. Did it influence you at all?
Oh, for sure. I remember, like, even when I started really seriously studying composition, kind of just at the end of high school, going into uni, like, that was one of the things that I always wanted to write, like, from the start. Like, I thought it'd be really cool to be able to be able to write music like that. Not only just the kind of sound and the world that it creates, but the iconic melodies, like you said, and yeah, it's it's just good music at the end of the day.
Yeah, no, that's good. I was more of an opposite thing, because my story is essentially I didn't bother with music until I was maybe 17, 18, and I was 8 when Ocarina of Time came out. So at the time, I didn't care. But when I look back at it, like, all Zelda music is effectively very influential on what I do. But especially Ocarina of Time, because when I come back to it, I'm like, I didn't really appreciate that much as a kid. But now I'm like, I know exactly how it works and how cool it is. And it's a weird thing coming back to a game that you didn't really notice the music, partly because my brain was a teeny tiny thing being 8, but also it was very odd. I don't know where I was going with that. I've lost what I was saying. Good start. Never mind.
Yeah, no, it is. I think I've just forgotten where my train of thought was going as well. One thing we were looking at as well, though, speaking of our first Zelda games, and something that we will be kind of looking at later on in this podcast, are the various different, as I kind of mentioned before, the various different consoles and bits of technology that Zelda games have been released on. And I always remember as well the first kind of handheld Zelda games that I played, which were the 2 Oracle games, Oracle of Ages and Seasons, on the Game Boy / Game Boy Color, which were quite cool in themselves, because it was kind of, even though I obviously the very first Zelda games were well before my time, and in a way being able to, like, experience that in the Game Boy. The Game Boy was my first kind of gaming console thing, whatever you want to call it. So coming through to that and having this different, to me, the handheld Zelda games and the console Zelda games, although they're obviously very connected and they're part of the same universe and all that kind of stuff, they're a very different experience, the two of them. And for me, I always remember games like that kind of really explore well what you can do with the limitations of that kind of that kind of 8-bit hardware, 8-bit, 16-bit.
Zelda games have been very much the ones that push the boundaries of what the hardware can do easily. I've actually had I've played Oracle of Ages, but it wasn't until, like, it came out on Virtual Console and such. My first was probably Minish Cap for the Game Boy Advance. Technically speaking, it was actually probably A Link to the Past on the Game Boy Advance when they remade it. But I'm not sure I'm going to count that, because it wasn't its original thing. It was a remake. I mean, And I played a little bit of the Four Swords thing that came with it.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, was that even a real Zelda? I don't know. Controversial. But no, I'm counting Minish Cap's my first one.
Yeah, fair
But
enough.
I'm also counting that because that's the only one I can remember music from. One of the weird things with the Zelda handheld games is, with the exception of Minish Cap and the latest one, A Link Between Worlds, I don't remember any of the music at all. I don't remember any of the music from Oracle of Ages or Seasons. I don't remember any of the music from the DS ones. What were they called? Like Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Train tracks. I don't remember any of the music. I've got the soundtracks and I regularly listen to them. But if you ask me to hum a tune from any of them, I'm just going to pull a blank. I don't remember them at all, which is interesting. I'm not sure why that is. I suppose it's because I've played the other Zelda console games loads of times. I've at least played through all of them twice. Whereas with the handheld ones, it's kind of I've played through and that's that. All done. With the exception of Minish Cap again. So...
Well, yeah, I guess for my first ones, the Oracle games, that may have been kind of a more direct thing of a lot of those iconic themes not being there. I do remember, obviously they had the main theme in there in various forms, depending on the games, and they had some dungeon music that I remember, but because those games weren't, I suppose it's a story thing, because those games weren't set in Hyrule. You know, there's that continuity with a lot of the games where we have these themes and motifs coming back that represent a location, a person, whatever it is, that don't, because their characters or their locations or whatever aren't present in the game, they're just not there. But I think as well, there's more to latch onto in those kind of more lush orchestrations as well. I think, when you're playing something that has kind of chip music, 8-bit or 16-bit, all you really have is the melody and either a bit of harmony or some percussion track or something underneath it. So there's not a lot. If you don't remember the theme or the melody, then that's kind of all there is in there. So I can understand that.
Yeah, well, whilst you're talking about the limitations of the old stuff, we might as well start talking about the original Zelda on NES.
Yeah, let's go back to the start.
Yeah, because, I mean, the reason that music is so catchy is because composers at the time had to make it catchy. They had no other choice. That's why Super Mario's got the very kind of catchy... what genre was it? Like... Caribbean. There's a specific. It has there's a genre which it fits in perfectly, like salsa or something. Whatever. That's Mario.
Kind of
screw it.
soca kind of
Yeah.
thing, whatever,
But yeah, with Zelda again, very catchy stuff. But the reason behind that was the NES couldn't actually handle maybe 4 or more voices. I'm pretty sure if you tried to do more voices in your music, it would actually crash the NES. So they were stuck with maybe a melody, a little bit of harmony, and a percussion. And maybe a bass if you're lucky. I don't remember if it's 3 or 4, but one of them.
I think it was just 4.
Yeah, but either way, they were struggled to actually create anything that was timbrally interesting because they were limited by how, by today's standards, abysmal the NES was in terms of hardware.
Yeah, sure.
Your turn to talk.
Yeah, I guess as well though, it's it's interesting to look back at Legend of Zelda, the original.
When did you play the original?
Oh, very, very recently. I think it was actually close to the end of high school, so maybe about like 7 or 8 years ago.
Okay.
So what would I have been, like about 16 odd, I think.
Oh, okay.
So, and that was on Wii Virtual Console. That was like, I mean, the game is the same. That doesn't change at all. No. But I think it's that much more noticeable now. I mean, it would have been an amazing thing at the time when it came out. And, I still love the music now. But it's an interesting comparison when you look back now and play those old kind of 8-bit games and kind of look at really what they had to work with. And, there's a lot of compositional craft that goes into writing a piece of music when you're so limited that you only have 3 or 4 voices to write.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It's
It reminds me of some of the challenges we had to do for university because we both done music degrees, and some of the stuff we had to do in first year was things like write a piece for just like 3 notes, or write a piece with just percussion, or things like that. And that's the same thing here. It's like write a piece with no timbre and no kind of color other than beeps and boops, and 3 voices, not allowed any more than that.
Yeah.
Just as hard mode. We're saying 3 now.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing to note because obviously, nowadays there has been, particularly within like the indie sector of games, there's been a big resurgence of this kind of old school pixel style gaming, with this pixel art and the old and like these chiptune pieces, and there's some awesome chiptune writing out there, but there's also a lot of stuff that again just wouldn't technically be possible. With using the real old school stuff, because again, they just wouldn't have that many voices.
No, for sure.
So it's
I mean, one of the ways they combated with that was doing what's called arps, which is arpeggios, which is going up and down a chord, but doing it extremely fast. That's why you hear things like that all the time. One of the arrangements I did of the Midiboom theme, because we have a couple of dozen, or I hope we have a couple of dozen if Stefan's been doing his work.
We will have a couple of dozen.
Okay, good. One of the ones I did was a chiptune one, or an 8-bit one, or whatever you want to call it. I used like samples from the original NES chip cards, and in order to actually make it sound decent, I did the ARP thing as well.
Yeah.
You hear that a lot. And you can actually hear that sometimes in Zelda music as well, which is interesting, especially in the dungeons, in order to kind of pad out the sound, I guess. Because you can't just stick a pad on music-wise these days. These days you can just like flipping, here's a music pad, I don't care, it's just a preset in Pad Shop Pro or whatever.
Yeah.
And bam, you're done. But with the olden days, you had to kind of get funky with your ideas.
Yeah, for sure. It's a particular challenge within game writing as well. If we just look as well at the way that you write music for a game, it's different to a lot of things. It's even different to film scoring because of that whole element of having to have music that will be able to loop in with itself and kind of be adapted to a change in environment in the game or when you move between locations. To have the breadth of sound that they do in games like that, where they had to take all of these things into account with these restrictions was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's saying that in, the first couple of Zelda games, I think that probably would apply later on. Maybe not so much in the original one because they were working the different themes and, it's kind of hard to remember specific examples of that. But, if you kind of look, even probably Zelda 2 as well, you could find examples of that, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Like, we should be appreciative of the fact that the hardware was so crap at the time, because it gave birth to the very, very catchy, memorable tunes that we know today. And it was the same with number 2. I mean, the temple theme comes from number 2, which most people actually know from Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
Because of the level temple.
Yeah.
But, that one and a lot of the original pieces from Legend of Zelda on the NES have continued on through the ages. So we should be happy that hardware was so rubbish back in the day.
Oh, definitely.
But this obviously changed when the SNES came about and Link to the Past was born. Like the music in that is much more is thicker the right word? I don't know.
Well, I think there are 2 factors that really really define the change in the SNES. I mean, obviously the first one is the fact that you could just have more stuff in there. So you're able to have more voices. You're able to have you're able to pad those things out a little bit more, and be able to utilize different voicings and things, stuff like that. But also because the hardware was upgraded, they had access to a bigger range of sounds. You look right back to the old school 8-bit chips, and really like all you had was really altering the waveforms that you were given. So, You kind of get it as noisy and low as you can for percussion, and then you have chords above that. Whereas with the hardware on the SNES and that upgrade, you can warp things a little bit more. You're still working in that synthesized waveform environment, but you can do different things, get slightly different sounds, different waveforms, and that gives you more of a palette to work with.
More advanced, basically, which means they could make sounds that sound awful compared to the actual thing, but in terms of at the time, it was like, wow, this actually sounds much more like a trumpet than a square wave does. Or wait, what's the normal wave you use for friggin'? It might be sine the square. I don't remember. Either way,
I think the square wave is always the memorable one. I think
that's triangle, isn't it?
Yeah, triangle is the...
Hang on, let me imitate
Sawtooth's the kind of more buzzy one, and then sine wave is that very rounded, pure one. But I think, square wave to me is the one that is the memorable one, because that's what you hear with a lot of the big... I'm reasonably confident that the original Zelda theme, when you hear it, is first presented in that kind of square wave form.
Okay, good.
I apologize if I'm wrong on that, but
no, I know my waves, but then when I tried, someone says like, "Sing me this wave," I'm just like,
well, it's hard. It's you can't really replicate it too easily with anything else other than a synthesizer, because it's just a pure waveform. But it's a bit off topic.
The SNES, whatever, it doesn't matter. The SNES had much better hardware to actually work with. So it started to sound more like an orchestration. So in the Link to the Past, the overworld theme, the main theme was on a trumpet, inverted commas. It didn't sound like a trumpet in retrospect to an actual trumpet, but in terms of that hardware, it sounded...
Well, it's so much closer than it had ever been gotten.
Yeah, so that's all good. And a lot of new kind of themes came out of that as well. I mean, the Dark World theme's always a fun one to do.
Oh, yeah.
I know you're very partial to that theme.
I've said frequently about my love for the Dark World theme from Link to the Past. But yeah, I think as well, because, overall, one of the big things about Link to the Past, even though those first couple of Zelda games were big games in themselves, like they're a big area, big world, and they kind of really did well this open world thing that hadn't been done before in games. But for me, like, Link to the Past is a very big game especially for the time. But it helps that you had that hardware upgrade, as we've been talking about. But for me, the Hyrule in that game was always felt very big and very lively and very varied, and so being able to have that big palette to use in the sound world, or comparatively big palette, really helps kind of establish each of the different locales, and this kind of when you move between the light world and the dark world, you have this wonderfully different feeling. Even little things along the way, like you think about the music when early on in the game you get to the Sanctuary.
I love the Sanctuary
which
music,
is
especially
fantastic.
Have you heard the updated version in A Link Between Worlds?
I have, yeah.
That's
and
so good.
It's lovely, yeah. But it's just things like that, and that really highlights as well the way that they were able to manipulate waveforms as well with the hardware, whereas on the NES system you were pretty much limited to just banging out noises. With the chip, you were able to actually kind of color sounds a bit more. And that's one that always sticks out to me,
A non-music thing which I liked about Link to the Past, which I'll just mention here because I'm probably going to whine about it in the later games, is that it's one of the first Zelda games that kind of felt populated. Like Hyrule Village actually felt like people lived there. And when you went around and found people, it felt like they actually lived there, as opposed to I'm an NPC, talk to me and do things. It was more like, I live here, what do you want? And that outside of music, one of my biggest pet peeves of the Zelda series is whether it feels populated enough, which we'll go into later when we talk about the later games. But for now, just know Link to the Past gets my tick of approval in that regard. And we've already said music sounds good too.
Oh yeah, but I think that scale idea is one to kind of take and run with as we move through the games now, because that's that's a fundamentally important part of a lot of Zelda games, and we've already seen the themes musically of Zelda be established in earlier games, and to me, Link to the Past represents the next big step in, if you kind of have a musical timeline of Zelda, you kind of start with the music of the first games, and then if you chart it along kind of from then to today over, the 25 and a bit odd years, whatever it is, 27 or whatever it is now.
20, was it 25 when Skyward Sword came out?
Yeah, so it's like 28
so it's
now or
something like that.
Anyway, if you charted over that period, this is kind of the next big step in Zelda music. We take some of the music from before, we add a few extra themes, and we utilize they utilize the extra goodies that they have in the hardware.
Goodies. All right, that's a good word.
To really boost it up and take it to the next level.
I see what you mean. There were very specific. I mean, you can argue that all Zelda games are the next step forward in Zelda games, but I think in terms of music, there were some very iconic sections.
I think within the Zelda games,
more to two
musically and otherwise. I'm talking away from the microphone a bit here. Musically and otherwise, you have what I consider to be major and minor steps in games. So, that's a big step, obviously, and the step up to 64-bit with Ocarina of Time is another one. But then you have minor steps as well. So you look at Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, or if you look at like Majora's Mask and Ocarina of Time, or even we'll take those ones for now. The other examples are kind of more complicated as well. But
there are definitely major ones which were huge improvements. So like Link to the Past, like you said, Ocarina of Time's the big one as well. I'm willing to say that the rest of them weren't that big a leap until Skyward Sword. Skyward Sword had a huge...
That's why I didn't mention Skyward Sword in that comparison.
Might as well.
But just to bring it back, this was obviously, it's a big step, as we've spent a lot of time talking about the hardware just now. But I think also as well, by this stage, a lot of the themes are kind of beginning to get that familiarity. So we're also setting ourselves up for what happens in later games, and really bringing back these repeated idea of motifs. I think this is possibly the game where you really start seeing things used strongly as motifs as well. So I mean, obviously the overworld theme is prevalent in a lot of games. So that one's kind of through sheer repetition. But then you have these other ideas of place that come through. You have the idea of a castle as well, having this central thing, and what will essentially become the Zelda theme is born out of that. I can't remember off the top of my head whether it's referred to that as such in Link to the Past, but
are you referring to like Zelda's Lullaby? Or... that I don't remember that being in Link to the Past.
I think it is at some point.
I don't remember. But it wouldn't surprise me. Because very much like there's always kind of this connection between the musics of each Zelda game.
Yeah, but even I think just in the story as well, like even though the first Zelda was the first, this is where the classic kind of Zelda formula is really established. And within that, you see that being set up in the music as well. In the use of the themes that we do have in this game. The various motives that are used and what they begin to symbolize in a more direct way.
What do you mean by Zelda formula here? Because my argument is that actually came about, or the modern version came about in Ocarina of Time, not Link to the Past.
Well, there are a lot of similarities between the two games. Even though I'd argue that there's the stories can be quite different. You have a lot of the major kind of locations.
Oh, okay. I thought you were referring to the music, not just the general thing.
No, not necessarily music. I don't think the music is as directly formulaic as it is in later games in this game, but you see the kind of let's call it then almost like the prelude to that.
No, I get what you mean now. I thought you meant like the music.
Because I mean overall.
Yeah, if you're referring overall, then yeah, I definitely see that in A Link to the Past, that's the case. It's just like, oh no, Zelda's been kidnapped. Get the different temples. Usually there's do these temples, or there's like 3 of them, and then it's like, oh no, something bad happened. Now do 6.
Yeah. Well, you have that kind of multiple act structure established in the game.
Yeah, okay. And, so that structure I agree with. Yeah. But the music, I think the music formula for Zelda actually more came about in Ocarina of Time. And the reason I say that is because when Ocarina of Time came about, obviously this was the N64, so again, another huge leap in hardware, and it introduced the use of things like samples and opened up an entire new sound world. And compared to Super Mario, the Zelda music moved to a timbral world rather than what Mario did, which stayed with the melodic type of thing. You see that even now today with Mario Galaxy and Super Mario 3D World. They're all got really nice orchestrations, but ultimately they're about the melody and the harmony. Whereas if you look at Zelda music, outside of dungeons, they've got nice tunes, I guess. But in dungeons, they've gone completely timbral. I was discussing with you before we started this. Again, I'm going through Ocarina of Time with one of our friends called Darren. And he made a comment because we were going through the Forest Temple saying, like, this music's weird. I was like, yeah, it kind of is. All the music, all the dungeon music in Ocarina of Time is actually really weird. And I think the reason for that is that it completely takes away the melodic aspect of what we expect from Zelda music, and instead throws in much more atmospheric sounds. And it works because you still remember the music. I mean, if I say to you, like, what's the Forest Temple music to you? Do you think of a catchy tune, or do you think of the sound?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you think of the sound. And that's iconic in itself. And it's the same with a lot of the other ones as well. I mean, the Great Deku Tree has the kind of really thick synth sounds, and Dodongo's Cavern's all about the random percussion hits that have crazy amounts of reverb.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they all have their own iconic timbral sound world. And that is very different to what we expect from a Zelda soundtrack if we were just looking at the past stuff. But that's continued on throughout all the Zelda games of the future. So I'm saying the Ocarina of Time soundtrack is the one that all other soundtracks from then on use as its template, effectively.
Well, I guess, a lot of that comes from the next big leap forward, which, you've already mentioned the fact that they were able to utilize, samples and kind of use a different palette of sounds. But I think if we look at even just a broader level, the thing that they were now able to do at that point, now that the hardware allowed them, was to actually treat sound as sound. And this isn't just music. This is generally, so, even within the games, you can actually have proper sound effects and Foley and that kind of stuff in there. And with that, to lead on further, what that allows you to do is to actually mix the music like proper sound, like audio, like we do now, like has always been done with recorded sound. You have your mastering effects that you can put on it, reverb, EQ.
That's a good point, actually.
All of those things. So, that was something that they weren't ever able to do before these games. All the games before, as we discussed, had to be about just the music and just what they were used. Whereas now, that was an option to them because they could treat the music and the samples in this way. And it's also it's also probably one of the first times in the game where, you know, you could almost argue that one of the major musical ideas that comes into this game is silence as well. If you think of some of the iconic points of silence in the game, like where you, just before you end up, by the way, these games are all very old, but there will be spoilers about this podcast. So
yeah, I think what is it, like friggin' 17 years is enough time for people to be playing.
Probably, but regardless, you have been warned.
Right.
Yeah, so iconic moments like just before you enter the Temple of Time, and later on when you come out of the Temple of Time, you know, after you've been locked away there and you come back into, well, the now whatever version you want to call it of the village, of the town square, where really there is no music in there. There is sound, there are effects, and, you know, you might want to say there are some temporal elements in there, but it's probably the first time, and look, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not familiar with the earlier games to that level where I could say for sure whether there is silence in those games or not. For me, it's a memorable silence because you can treat silence the way you normally can in something that you score, where it's not really silent, but there's an absence of what traditional music is would call it.
No, I agree. I don't recall any kind of specific silence-based things before Ocarina of Time, but I agree with all of that because one thing it reminded me of, especially when you said about Hyrule Castle Town Market, where there's no music when you're an adult. Technically there is, but the reason for that is reactive. It's the first example of reactive music. Ocarina of Time and most N64 games were the first examples where when you went, the music changed according to what you were doing. In things like Link to the Past, when you're running down the overworld, you're beating the crap out of enemies or you're picking up rocks or something, the music's always the same. But in the example of Ocarina of Time, there's no music in Hyrule Castle Town Market unless you walk up to one of the redeads, and then it starts doing the battle music.
That's right, yeah, I'd forgotten about that. Yeah.
And yeah, that reminded me that was the first example, or the first example in Legend of Zelda anyway.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the first example I can recall was probably Banjo-Kazooie in terms of reactive music. But with Legend of Zelda, Ocarina of Time was the first one that had that kind of reactive sound, which again added a whole new layer onto the soundtrack.
Oh, definitely. One thing that we haven't discussed at this point, which it kind of becomes very relevant with Ocarina of Time as well, is the use of the active use of music in the game, not just as a soundtrack, but as an important element of the game. Again, you know, foreshadowed maybe earliest in Link to the Past with the flute. But, you know, obviously, well, even in the name, Ocarina of Time, the ocarina is a major part of the game. And within that, you know, the act of kind of playing music becomes a fundamental part of the game. And it also gives rise to some of my favorite little bits of music in the game, which are the various songs and little things that you play to accomplish various things within the game.
Yeah, so you're like Epona's Song and
Epona's Song, Zelda's Lullaby, the trap,
Song of Storms,
Storm of Songs. And, you know, those ones are probably the ongoing iconic ones. But even just for me, like, some of my biggest musical memories from the game are just some of the little, like, I always really enjoyed Bolero of Fire. And, you know, that's just like a little, even when you hear it played out the full thing, when you learn it, it's like a very short song. But it's just these little things that, you know, that kind of permeate the game and, you know, kind of make this sound world even more lush. Because, you know, we retain that idea of kind of certain location having a certain music, and, you know, you know, there are the obvious ones. There's like the overworld theme, which has now become the kind of Hyrule field theme essentially, and the Kakariko village theme, and all the other ones. But there's, you know, there's also the other ones. these things, they're tied to a certain place, but they kind of highlight how the music of the newer Zelda, let's call them the newer Zelda games, the old games from this point, they kind of interrelate. There's that kind of reaction, not necessarily a more direct thing that's just related to like the audio engine, but how the music has now become almost a part of the world itself, rather than just being this kind of soundtrack that you hear in the background.
Do you know what my favourite song was from Ocarina of Time?
Oh, tell me.
The Scarecrow song. Especially as a kid, because it was literally just dun, 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 dun. And then Scarecrow would pop up and go, whee. Whereas now I'm like, yes, my time to compose. And then I write some
that's funny. Like, I always found that I'd try and make something cool, but then I'd just forget what it was. Because this is back before I realized. Actually, does it come up? I can't remember if it comes up on your little list of melodies.
I don't know. I don't think it does. No.
And because of that, I'd always forget what the song was.
Yeah, so that's why as a kid I just made it one note over and over again.
No, that's a very good point. But it's funny. We were talking before about this melody and timbral thing. I think it's funny how much of, because I think as a general thing, it's just fact that we're much more likely to remember music if it has a catchy melody or something that hooks you in. But for me, a lot of the things that I remember the most vividly, apart from the obvious themes, are things that don't have very memorable tunes. You can still recall them. Like I could sing you all the relevant bits of things like the Zora's Domain music, or growl and hum various things of like the Shadow Temple theme, or Under the Well.
There you go, straight up. That was the beginning 3 notes. Basically, Koji Kondo did a real good job of making timbre catchy, which is great. And this whole idea of a more timbral orientated route is shown a lot in Majora's Mask as well, because there's an underlying theme. Majora's Mask is essentially the weird experimental college years of Legend of Zelda, because everything is kind of weird. You've played Majora's Mask, right?
I have, yeah. I've actually been playing through it again. Well, I've had a very extended playthrough of it on the 3DS. I can't remember where I'm up to at the moment, but I think Stone Temple, very near the end.
Sweet. I played it through a number of times on various different places, like the N64 one, the GameCube thing that was on the collector's edition, Wind Waker, and and the 3DS one. But there's an underlying theme in 4 of the places, which are like the swamp, the mountain, the beach, and the
Stone
Valley.
Oh, the Valley. Yeah.
I think it's the Valley. Yeah.
Yeah.
They all have that theme, which goes something like do 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 wah 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 wah.
Yeah.
And the harmony is very dissonant, but all 4 of them have that, and all 4 of them are a completely different kind of orchestration compared to the other, but you can still very much tell that they're the same. I'll probably put up the examples whilst we're talking here, and kind of let them flow through, so you can hear, for the people who are listening, they can hear how connected these tunes are, yet they're essentially the same thing, just a different orchestration.
Yeah.
And that work, and a lot of the music is reused from Ocarina of Time as well. I mean, Romani Ranch has the same music as Lon Lon.
Oh yeah.
And then Clock Town, like there's 3 different pieces for Clock Town, like day 1, day 2, day 3, and again same melody, just different orchestration, and it works each time.
Well, I think if there's one, kind of looking behind the scenes of the game in Majora's Mask, if there's one theme or one kind of element that comes through is that element of reuse. Obviously a lot of assets are reused, not just the sound, but a lot of graphical assets are reused. But for me, like the big thing that I remember on a broad scale about the music and generally about Majora's Mask is how those elements have been kind of transformed in their own way. And that point that you make about the theme being reused is very interesting, because for me, one of my most memorable music moments in Majora's Mask is, funnily enough, from up to the Stone Tower theme. Because, obviously, when you're playing through the game, you go through the tower and then everything flips.
Yeah.
And you do it again. And
the
music follows that exactly. And to me, that's just a really, really good kind of microcosm or example to use of how, they've taken the music and they've been able to, whereas in the more, in the other Zelda games, we've had this, it's all been about depth and been about, variety and having this big world to kind of explore in and choose from. I think Majora's Mask, while Majora's Mask never felt too, it's a big game as well, but it's deceptively big. I think because maybe it's just because of the gameplay, because you're always moving forward, you're always kind of thinking about what's happening literally overhead. There's this kind of, the game forces you to play it in a very narrow kind of frame.
Yeah.
And I think the music is very effective at doing that. Like, if you look overall, there isn't as much musical material as in other Zelda games, but because you're being forced into this very narrow frame of reference, it's actually a very effective way of doing it, because you have, even if you don't consciously pick up on it, you have the same music being reinforced, and there's this idea of sameness going through.
Yeah.
Because I read a fascinating theory on, it's a very, very well-known one that goes around every so often, does the rounds, about that, that the story of Majora's Mask overall is representative of the stages of grief.
Oh yeah, because Link's sad or dead.
And I'm not necessarily saying that there's any credence to that rumor.
No.
It's just a rumor, but it does make an interesting parallel to kind of consider the music in that way. You have in Majora's Mask, the melodic material is the constant, and we really see how this kind of idea of timbre and different orchestrations, different rearrangements and rewriting of things can create a wealth of material out of a very small source pool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, Majora's Mask was great, and everything you said was correct. Sure, I kind of zoned out a bit there, but you.
Sorry, I did talk a bit there.
So good.
But,
so good.
Yeah.
No, Majora's Mask is one of the few Zeldas that I've kind of gone like, oh no, emotionally as well.
Yeah. It's a very strong game. Like it's, and I think that's why I really enjoyed coming back to it as well. Like, when I first played it through. Actually, when I first played it through, I'd rented it out from the video store. Back in the day when video stores were a thing, rental stores. But so I actually, ironically enough, it was a 3-day rental. So, a very short amount of time to play it in. So I didn't have a lot of time with the game. You kind of saw it all on face value. I don't think I even got through the game because I was still quite young at that stage, and it took me long enough to get out of Clocktown and work what was going on. But I think coming out of it, it's coming back to it. It's one of the more mature Zelda games, and it's nice to come back to it and pick that up, in the music and in the game itself. Yeah,
which is interesting, especially because of what came next. Because after Majora's Mask came The Wind Waker, which divided fans and then reunited them when it actually came out. If you remember the thing back when the GameCube came out, they had the demo where Link was an adult and like, whoa, check out my graphics, and everyone was like, whoa, can't wait. And then they kind of switched it a year later and brought out Toon Link, and everyone was just like, the hell is this? And then it divided fans completely. But then when Wind Waker came out, it turned out to be really good. And it brought fans back together. Such a happy ending, which is good. But in terms of the music, Wind Waker was an interesting beast, I felt. Because, how do I put it? I don't want to say I didn't like it, but there were some sections of the music where I was just like, average at best.
Completely, yeah.
I mean, there are some great songs in there. Dragon Roost Islands are essentially a indie classic.
Oh yeah, it's become one of the
hipster
iconic
classic
pieces
is one of
of
a better word to use. But then when you go back into the idea of the dungeons being all tumble based, when you go into those dungeons, like they don't have the same impact that Ocarina of Time and to an extent Majora's Mask did with the whole making timbre catchy. Like they work. And in Dragon Roost Cavern, for example, it works, but there's a lot of reused samples from Dodongo's Cavern in Dragon Roost Cavern. If you listen to Dragon Roost Cavern and Dodongo's Cavern, there's a few samples that are repeated in those two. And back in Dodongo's Cavern, those were iconic, because it was just like, oh, Jesus. But when you're in Dragon Roost Cavern, it's kind of like, well, it works, but it's just dungeon music now. And that's the same for a lot of them. Forbidden Woods, I'm going to say that's actually good, because I do remember some of the stuff in that. I don't remember any of the music from the Tower of Gods, so it can't have been that good.
Yeah, I can't bring it to mind now, so...
And then to some extent, the Earth and the Wind Temple as well. Actually, no, I do remember the Wind Temple music, and that was horrible.
Oh, yeah.
But I can't recall it now. No, come on. Think Brain was the Wind Temple music. It was, do, 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 just that for like 10 minutes. Yeah, it wasn't good. That was the first time, like, in a temple that I was just like, oh, why is the music here?
Yeah.
Go away.
Yeah, well, I think if we try and break that down and we look at the idea of scope in Zelda games, this is possibly the first time where what has worked for so long didn't end up working because, again, with the leap forward in hardware with the GameCube, even though they didn't end up going with their original tack that they went down of bumping up the graphics, and they very much bumped up the scale of the game with the Great Sea and this new location. And I think for me with the music, and I mean, again, there are a lot of stuff that I did love musically in Wind Waker, but I think the problem that probably happened, especially with the original release, I should point out that I never played it really on GameCube, but I have since played it on the HD release on Wii U.
Music-wise, there's not much of a difference.
No.
There's a little upgrade in terms of some of the music, like when the most recognizable one I found was when you play your little wind song and change the wind direction. The violin in that has been updated.
Yeah.
It now sounds like a violin as opposed to the weird GameCube version. But besides that, there's not really much difference in that.
But aside from that, I think because of this scope, and this even came through when I was playing the re-release with all of the improvements in kind of speed they made in the gameplay. But you end up hearing like a lot of music, like you end up hearing the sailing themes so much, like all of the time. And I actually quite enjoyed them. Like I really like the daytime sailing theme in particular. It's a really enjoyable piece of music. That kind of like like great piece of music. But you hear that so much, and you spend a little bit of time on the islands. Some islands you're barely on, fair enough. But the locations that are meant to be the more important ones in the story, like overall, you do end up spending quite a short amount of time on them. So there's not as much time for the music to make an impact. And I think for me, like, you do remember the big ones. Like you remember Dragon Roost Island, and you remember Windfall, Outset. But a lot of the other ones, like, you're just hammered with the other ones so much. I think that like you can only take so much in your memory, and so for me, a lot of that was just taken up with like listening to in a way, that's why I'm kind of glad that I was able to play through the speedier HD release, because I would have heard the sailing themes a lot more, and you would have, for anyone who played through the original one on GameCube, you would have heard those, so much more within a playthrough.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, it's a good point. Like, that is one of my peeves in music. The amount of music versus the amount of time you're there. Like, that's one of the game design things that people so overlook, and it really suffers in some places. But that's neither here nor there, because that's probably something we'll talk about in the future.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on to Twilight Princess, because we're taking a long time doing this.
Yeah.
Twilight Princess. Music was good. I enjoyed the music in that. I mean, there's not much to talk about in terms of like the moving on, the timeline and all that junk with Zelda music, because it still had there was nothing spectacular about it in terms of evolution.
Yeah.
In terms of melody, in terms of the actual music, oh great, friggin' really good. Midna theme, yeah.
I think
the field theme, yeah. Sorry, I just pulled a blank. I was just like, wait a minute, what other music's in Twilight Princess? Hang on. Horror field theme. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess they suffered. That probably, my guess would be that came from because they were obviously developing it, it was at that kind of transition period between the GameCube and the Wii. So, overall, and not just in the music, there were a lot of elements that kind of not suffered, but were limited by the fact that they had been making the game for GameCube and then made a Wii version. So, I think as a result of that, we see that even though, like you said, there's some great music, I mean, the Twilight Princess version of the Harold Field theme is one of my favorites. But, yeah, because we had the hangover from the GameCube times, we're not able to move forward in that game particularly. And, the music is great and it's worth checking out. And some of the, particularly, like I said, some of the themes and music around Midna I love. The kind of melodic bent that they took with it was really cool. Midna's one of, I think one of those characters that will become one of your favorites
if you play it.
And the music similarly, like I remember playing through the game, I noticed it a little bit, but then going back and listening to the soundtrack, it really, like, those were the bits that really stood out to me. I was like, this is really cool.
I think another issue with the Twilight Princess soundtrack was that it was at a time where we had the technology to have actual recordings of stuff in there and not take up all the space on the whatever disc or card or pack whatever you were using at the time. And like 100% of Twilight Princess was bad samples.
Yeah.
So I think it suffered a lot, especially with us as musicians, because we could tell like, it needs to be real.
Yeah. I think that's the hang up. I know it's a hang up that Richard and myself have, but I think when you know what the real thing sounds like, and like you said, we got to that point where it was a possibility. Yeah. Like, we're no longer bound by, the system just can't do it. So, you can live with it, and you can write. I think as well, you see as well the importance of writing for the instruments that you're using, and if those instruments are samples, or it's not as extreme as back in the chip days, but you still have to remember that you're writing for samples, and you have to write in a way that makes them kind of presentable.
Yeah. My favorite part of samples is when people make like woodwind or brass play constantly for like 3 or 4 minutes, just a continuous tone, and then when they get to the actual thing, they're just like, what, you can't do that?
Yeah.
It's like, no, they need to breathe. So yeah, that's one of the downside of samples, is that you're not working with actual people, and so the human side of it is gone.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's really an issue with Twilight Princess, because I do think they used the samples effectively. It's just the samples were out of date.
Oh yeah,
and
for sure.
Needed an upgrade.
Yeah,
I guess, which is another one of my pet peeves with Nintendo's music. So they really don't upgrade their samples, and they have now in the past year or so. But you look a couple of years back, and the samples that were out versus the music Nintendo composers were making there was a huge difference. Like, the modern samples could have easily made it so much better, but they were still using like choppy crud from 2007. So it's just like,
Yeah.
why?
Yeah, and it's a challenge developmentally, and even nowadays, just looking purely from the music side with what we do, like, the cycles of everything, update cycles and new release cycles are just so quick nowadays. Whereas before, back in the days of the earlier games, they'd be able to do that because you just wouldn't get anything new for a few years, so you'd be able to use them. But now, like, even when you look at sample libraries today, there's new things coming out all the time, and there's constantly better samples coming out, and you don't even need to be upgrading completely regularly when things come out.
No.
But there's no real excuse anymore.
Yeah, that's it. Like, if you want to be a decent composer, you need decent samples as well. That's an unfortunate reality.
Yeah, that's our pro tip.
Composer tip.
But
earn money.
Yeah, no, but it is one thing that I've seen a lot of people say, and not just what we've been saying now, but if at the end of the day, your product is the music that people hear, and if there's one thing that you really need to put some resources into, even if you don't have the best hardware to use it with or something, you really need those high quality samples nowadays, because it's just what people are using.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. So it's actually an interesting, because when Ocarina of Time came out on Virtual Console about a month or so back, IGN re-released their original review from back in 1998, and one of the things they said in that was the samples sound a little outdated. I'm just like, what? 1998? They sound fine. What are you on about? But yeah, it was interesting to know that there was an out-of-datedness in back in the day then, when now it's like out of date means, I don't know, half a decade, maybe a whole decade.
Oh, yeah.
So,
or if even.
Yeah. But anyway, the whole idea of it would be easier just to record the whole thing, essentially, is what we're trying to say, which almost worked with the Skyward Sword, because they recorded half of the soundtrack with that. Which, I've got another kind of with Skyward Sword, because I really enjoy the Skyward Sword soundtrack. But when you have, like, I don't know, what ones are recorded? The Skykeep. No, was Skykeep recorded? What's the name? Skyloft. Skyloft was definitely an actual recorded piece. When you go between that and, say, I don't know, one of the dungeons, like, what's the second dungeon? It's the desert.
Yeah, the one in the power plant.
Was that the third one?
I think that's
it's the third one. The desert dungeon.
Oh, it's the fire one. It's the second one.
Those two are not recorded. So when you go back and forth between a recorded thing and, as we've already mentioned, Nintendo's subpar samples, it's really jarring. If you listen to the orchestral part or the recorded part of the Skyward Sword soundtrack all over without looking at the others, you're good. If you listen to the others, you're good. But when they're intermixed with each other, it sounds really weird. I mean, another example is like the very first dungeon. I forget what it's called, but it's very blue in Skyward Sword, where your first boss fight is Girhim.
Oh yeah. It's
like
it's the one in the forest.
Yeah.
I
should
do
look
know
up
the
what
one.
that's called.
Yeah.
But I love the music in that. That's probably one of my favorite dungeon musics. And the reason for that is, one of the main reasons is because it's an actual recording of strings and bassoon and oboe and all that junk, and it sounds majestic, magnificent, whatever descriptive word you want to use. But then you go to the next dungeon and it's just like samples, and not good samples, and it's a very what's the word? Jarring. I've used the word jarring, so I'll use it again. Jarring experience.
Yeah, I guess I'm in a mixed mind about the dungeon music in Skyward Sword. I'll admit that it's not the most memorable part of the game music for me, because I really liked how I'll talk about it afterwards. But I really liked how they kind of treated the other melodies in the game. But I guess some of the dungeon music worked for me. Just looking at it in isolation, maybe I just didn't have as much of a hang up on it as you did. This is probably our most divisive Zelda game between the two of us.
Don't get me wrong. Like, I enjoyed the music. It's just that in isolation, it's a good piece. But if you put it in tandem with the rest of the soundtrack, it's just like, that doesn't sound like a real trumpet anymore. Oh, it's not. It's horrible. But
yeah, it's an interesting one. I guess, I'm sure there was a reason for it.
I'm going to
One
guess
way or the other.
budget was probably the main reason.
But I think the funny thing is as well, when because with Skyward Sword obviously came that, because it was the big 25th anniversary game, with it came the 25th anniversary CD, which is all fantastic.
That's great.
But obviously that was all recorded with a full orchestra. So I do kind of find it funny when, you look at it and you've got this wonderful CD of fantastically orchestrated arrangements of, all of the iconic Zelda music. And then you go into the game and you kind of get this mix. It's funny as well when you consider that, the game was billed big because they were really pushing that 25th anniversary thing.
Yeah, like I said, the budget was probably the reason, because there is so much music in Ocarina of Time. Skyward Sword, maybe like 4 odd hours at least. And if you can imagine, it costs a lot to get like a 1 hour soundtrack recorded.
Sure.
So if the 4, that's going to cost a pretty penny. I bet Nintendo probably had the money, but
it's
I
always
understand
a risk,
that it wasn't done. I just don't like it.
Yeah. I guess to look at the positives of the Skyward Sword soundtrack, one thing I really did like was the fact that they did go back and really, I think in more detail than before, really go back and look at the long-standing Zelda themes and music, and really kind of give them good treatment. And one of probably my favorite piece of music from the game, and one of my favorite little bits of Zelda music overall, is the Ballad of the Goddess. A fantastic piece of music. I love it, and I really love the orchestration of it as well. It's one of my favorite examples of what can be done with the Zelda music. But it's such fundamentally, it just comes from such a simple idea. I mean, the theme itself just comes from reversing Zelda's lullaby.
I was about to say, isn't that the one with the reverse thingamabob?
And it's something that it's very simple change, but it's not immediately obvious, but it gives this wonderful link to the these kind of old themes. And I think that's one of the strengths of Skyward Sword, is that it really I suppose they were being very careful of this, but is one that looks back very well and treats well the Zelda music that's been around for a long time at this point, and breathes new life into it in different ways as well.
Yeah, well, as I said before, when we're talking about like the big leaps in Zelda music design, we said like Link to Ocarina of Time. Skyward Sword is a big leap in the music of The Legend of Zelda, because one, it was when they actually decided to start recording stuff, but two, it looks back and really kind of pushes the boundaries of what each past thing does. So as you said, a lot of the Ballad of the Goddess is literally just Zelda's lullaby backwards. And there's so many Easter eggs like that in the music that it's iconic, because it's clear that they spent a lot of effort to do it. It's also the first Zelda which wasn't written by Koji Kondo. Pretty sure it was a bunch of other guys. I think
so, time. Yeah. I'm just trying to remember I can't remember if
I think he did some of the work.
His last game was
it was Twilight Princess. He did.
Yeah.
But this one, I'm pretty sure it was the in-house composers like Nagametsu and the other ones. I forget the name of right now. Sorry.
We'll I don't know. We'll put up a list of.
Well, I remember Nagametsu because he also did Link Between Worlds, and he also did Mario Kart, and he did all these themes that when I talk to people online and stuff, they're like, "Oh, I loved what Koji Kondo did in Skyward Sword," and I'm just like, "That wasn't him."
Yeah.
And everyone's like, "What? How could it not be him?" And it's funny because these composers are pushing the music further, I feel, which is nice. It's a fresh eye on the music, which is good.
That's almost the strength of having someone else come in. I mean, Koji Kondo is an iconic composer, and fantastic what he does. One of the probably one of the people that everyone looks up to for what he's done over his time there. But you see it in a lot of long-standing game series when they kind of move on to a different composer. You do get this interesting thing where, because there's someone else writing it and a different voice there compositionally, even if you take the same material and kind of keep that going forward, there's this kind of fresh life into it. And that, I think, is one of the other strengths of Skyward Sword. I mean, it was not as familiar or probably, let's say, safe a game as Twilight Princess was in terms of what they were trying to do. And that's divisive in itself. Some people like it, some people don't. Personally, I really enjoyed the game. I have hang-ups on it as well.
I enjoyed it, but I found that there was too many bad things about it that kind of all boiled together and made me go,
Yeah. So I guess for me, like, I had a positive experience of the game. There were some things that annoyed me, but one of the big things for me was that I liked the kind of, it was the game that felt the most new and different to me in a while, and that to me was something that really kind of stood out while I was playing it. And the music as well, obviously, for all the reasons that we just said, parallels that. That's a good thing.
Yeah, it is. Anyway, we've gone way over time already, haven't we?
We've had a jumbo first episode.
Yeah, we'll quickly, the last thing, all right. The best Zelda music, in your opinion? Like, if you met someone who had never ever heard any Zelda music and you wanted them to hear the very best piece from the entire series, what would you tell them?
That is such a hard choice. Look, I probably my kind of official answer, let's say, or my kind of sensible answer would actually probably be the Overworld theme. I think there's a reason that it's so it's so memorable. It's an interesting piece of music. Harmonically, it's very interesting, and there's a lot in there. Unofficially, I would probably say, actually, I think probably Zelda's Lullaby is a nice parallel as well. I think you need something that kind of, if you're going to talk to someone who is new, you need something that's kind of iconic and goes through the whole thing. Otherwise, my favorite is the Dark World theme.
Of course. Yeah, like if I was going to do one, I'd probably just choose one of the generic ones, like, the Overworld theme, like you said, or Zelda's Lullaby, or maybe even something like The Lost Woods or Song of Storms, because they're both very iconic things. But if I was just going to choose one piece that I really, really like, that I really want them to listen to, I'd probably choose Fi's theme from Skyward Sword, because I love the orchestration in that. Like, absolutely. And it's also played by an actual flautist. I'm just like, oh, yes. Nice.
It is a lovely piece of music, yeah.
Yeah, I love that theme. Fi's not my favourite sidekick by any stretch of the imagination, but I love her theme. So that would be mine. But that's essentially it, what we're going to talk about in terms of Zelda music. I'm sure we could talk about a lot more, and I imagine we've had to cut a lot out of what we could probably say. But given that we only want to keep these around the 1 hour mark, we'll leave it at that, I think. Yeah,
look, and probably what will happen, we may not come back to Zelda in another podcast discussion, we may, but inevitably we will be doing some Zelda games in Let's Plays, and that'll give us more of a chance to go through the music of each individual game and kind of go and look at it as we're playing the game in the context that it's meant to be looked at.
So they'll be fun. Hopefully. If I'm not rubbish at them. We practiced Twilight Princess and I was rubbish at it. I was awful.
To be fair, like, it wasn't as bad. I don't know if those recordings will ever see the light of day.
They won't.
But yeah, I'm sure that'll be fun.
I died twice in this first area. So, they're never seen the light of day. But yeah, that'll be it. I mean, for now, we'll do future podcasts. I mean, we've got plenty of things to talk about. I mean, I want to talk about indie game music and the state of it at the moment. I want to talk about how game creators treat audio. And depending on where they are. So, like big budget do big budget audio, whereas indie game guys in their basement think of audio as a passing thing, and that's not cool. But we'll talk about that in greater detail later.
Yeah.
And there's so many other things I want to talk about, so we're plenty more to.
Yeah, we'll have a lot of further topics. So make sure that if you want to hear more, you subscribe to our.
If you're listening to
various
this
forms.
via YouTube, yeah, because this is this is a podcast.
No,
so-
but we'll probably have an RSS feed or something up
Oh,
as well,
yeah,
or
okay.
wherever we put them up, there will be an option to follow us
Yeah.
or subscribe us. So
Yeah.
make sure you do that. And also, please, if you'd like to leave us some feedback or something like that through whatever means is your favorite.
Yeah.
Give us some feedback on things you like to hear, maybe things you want to hear more about, or if you have any further points to make about what we've talked about in this.
If you want to send any grueling emails on why Fi's theme is the worst, then go ahead. I'll fight you for it. But yeah, until then, feel free to contact us for whatever.
Yeah,
you need.
contact us, and we'll also have the first Let's Play coming out sometime around now or soon.
Yeah,
So
now or
if
soon. I don't know when.
If that kind of thing interests you, then make sure you head over to our YouTube and check that
Okay,
out.
sweet. Yeah, and of course, if you want to hear some of our own original music outside of the games, we have our Syntone channel on YouTube. So don't forget to go onto there and check out stuff.
We'll put some links around to things on the various sites and things. So yeah, please go and check that out as well.
Yeah, so we'll see you next time.
See you then.